I'm going to show you guys a really great variety of desert beetles here in a few moments, probably more than you've seen in any other video on YouTube in terms of ones going into a pet bug tank. In fact, you're probably hard pressed to find a documentary where they show this many different species of desert beetles. 4 species of death feigning beetles: Cryptoglossa variolosa, Asbolus verrucosus, Cryptoglossa muricata, and here, the smooth one, Asbolus laevis. And full of beetles. Woolly darklings. I believe the females tend to be a little larger than the males. I've got a great video on the sales page of the website that I took many years ago, where there's a male riding on the back of a female, and I have some Western music playing in the background. Quite hilarious. You should check it out. A word about serendipity. Just a moment ago I texted my friend to ask him what the name was of this new darkling beetles that I just got. And a few moments later he texted me back the name, and just because I'm always very concerned about being accurate with things and double checking my sources, I decided to come to Bug Guide to type that species name in. Well, here on the home page, the very last entries shows that hisser dude, Tristan, 39 minutes ago, just uploaded this very same species, Iphthiminus serratus there. Actually, I guess it's not his picture. He placed it. And so if we click on that, we're going to see that somebody else had uploaded this May 31st, so about a month ago. And then down below, hisser dude just moved them to identified. She had found them in Montana, and my friend found them here in Oregon. Anyway, serendipity, small world, universe is participating once again in the creation of the video I'm trying to make for you guys here on YouTube today. 2 new species for me. This one ranges here in the Pacific Northwest and over to Montana, Iphthiminus serratus. And they seem a bit arboreal. I've noticed them climbing a lot in the tanks, and apparently they are found on trees sometimes. Seem to favor a slightly more moist habitat. Pretty good sized beetles, kind of flattened. Really love their shape. And then this other one here is Cerenopus concolor. They're really, really active. And I love their distinctive head, thorax, and abdomen. Sometimes those 3 body parts kind of run together on beetles, but in this species here, and they're pretty good sized too, very distinctive. This one is so active. Let's talk about ironclad beetles. This is Philopsis porcata from here in the Pacific Northwest. We often find them in association with fungus growing on bark, shelf fungus, these ones prefer a slightly more moist habitat, of course, which opens up the options for some of us pet bug keepers that have a little trouble keeping tanks dry. And then over here, a couple definite desert type species. I believe this one here on the bottom is Zopherus tristus, probably the most common kind of ironclad beetle I tend to see. Next to it there is what's called a diabolical ironclad beetle. Eleodes may or may not be the genus. I see Nosoderma listed for them as the genus too. By the way, I like to joke a little bit about how these ironclad beetles, they even outdo death feigning beetles in how much they play dead, and to the point that I sometimes joke with my customers, including just earlier today, that they are capable of putting a pet rock to shame with their death feigning abilities. And finally, this last one down here, also probably in the genus Eleodes, and its species is plicatus. And again, this one doesn't really, you can't really see the notches on it. Often on these diabolical ironclad beetles, there are a few pits on the back there that are kind of key in determining the species. Let's see if at a different angle we can see them better here. There are a few diagonal pits there. You can sort of see 4 of them. If I can hold the camera still enough there on the back. Entomologists who pin insects are well known for talking about how difficult it is to stick a pin through a dead specimen of one of these, tell stories about breaking pins. And one person told me once that they had accidentally run one over with a car and that the beetle survived. Their exoskeletons, that shell, that cuticle, so very thick. And of course that helps them to prevent water loss in the often very dry areas that they occur in. While these Oregon ones over here from a more humid habitat, finally we see something in this portion of the video moving. They're very cryptic. You can imagine them on the right kind of bark, just blending in so very well with it. You wouldn't know that they're something separate and living from it. Setting up your desert beetle tank. This is a much larger tank than is really necessary to keep desert beetles. People often ask me how many desert beetles can I keep in such sized tank. And what I've learned to recommend is that about 1 beetle for every 2 inches surface area on the bottom of the tank is what I recommend. The beetles, you will find that they're often crowding together during the day, especially underneath of cork bark hides, bits of bark, whatever else you might have in there for them to hide under. They do like that feeling of security in the tank as well as in nature during the heat of day and the arid, usually desert areas they often occur in. They will find a place to wait until the evening hours when they tend to emerge and be more active, and then nocturnally as well. They will be out during the night for most species that I tend to have on the website. And so what I'm going to do now is spend a few moments cleaning up this very old cage. I'll take you around the cage here a little bit before we get started on the cleaning process. Very old tank. Had a heat lamp up here. Got a little too close to the edge. Melted that little section right there. Got a lot of dirt in here. One thing I want to point out is there is a rubber molding strip that runs up the corner of this. Lots of aquariums, terrariums built for fish will have that rubber molding. And sometimes some kinds of pet bugs can crawl up that, but I've never seen a desert beetle do it. Now, another thing here, I cracked this cage, but I kind of keep everything, and this one here, just put a little bit of tape over the crack there to keep it from spreading, but you got to be careful in cases like that if you have a crack in your cage. Got a lot of mineral deposits here. Supposedly, if you use distilled water instead of tap water, you won't get those kinds of deposits, but one of the tricks to do is to pull a razor blade out like this. I recommend not filming and doing it two hands, of course. But I worked at UPS for 19 years, and famous last words, I know my way around a razor blade. God, that's taken way too long. That's like a YouTube hour right there. Get off of there. All right, you can use this to scrape off those mineral deposits. It takes a while. If you're the kind of person that wants things to look perfect, well, your tank's probably not going to look like this in the first place, but that's what you do about it. And, you know, it'll pretty much take anything off there. Years worth of accumulation. Might want to wear a mask while you're doing this. Who knows what's on the side of that tank there, but my immune system is the better for it. At least that's what I keep telling myself. So we'll get this cage cleaned up here, and then we'll start putting it together with the sand and little decorations, the decor. Hey, trying to eat here. Do you mind? Josh Pants 72. I'm going to show you guys a really great variety of desert beetles here in a few moments, probably more than you've seen in any other video on YouTube in terms of ones going into a pet bug tank. In fact, you're probably hard-pressed to find a documentary where they show this many different species of desert beetles in one video. First, though, we're going to set up a general desert beetle tank. Now, you can run most desert beetle species that are available in the online pet hobby in a strictly sand-based substrate, nothing else in it. If you want to raise them generationally, you'll find that it'll be much better if you put some kind of soil, compost, dirt-based substrate into the bottom. Mix that in with the sand. Most of these beetles are going to come from arid or desert type of habitats. And the larvae, after they lay their eggs and the eggs hatch. Here we are, blue death feigning beetles, an Instagram favorite. And right there, 2 eggs. I've been collecting eggs lately. I'm going to be doing a nice YouTube video, little size reference for you, of their incubation. Have them here along with the others I just collected, and we'll be documenting them hatching. You can tell the difference between living ones and this dead one here. The dead ones turn black, and believe it or not, play dead better than the living ones. the larvae are going to crawl downwards into the substrate. And so, because I'm going to set up a mixed tank that's not specific to one species, I'm going to pour all this compost in here. I'm going to create a tank with a moisture gradient so that one side is kept a little bit more moist and the other side a little bit more dry. And the reason for that is that some species may prefer a drier habitat, while others may prefer a more moist habitat. And I'm also going to grade it so that one side where the compost is I'm also going to grade it to where one side is deeper in terms of where the soil is, this compost. And then this side over here will be higher with sand. That will be the dry side. One thing that's very helpful also for larvae is to bury a chunk of wood like this. And this is actually very soft over on this side right here. It can actually flake apart. And I'm going to partially bury that here in the substrate. And we're going to drop some sand up on top of all of this here pretty soon. I want this to be just slightly exposed. And so we'll do it like that so that the beetles can come up to it and they can crawl under it if they want to, or lay their eggs near it, because hopefully they will detect that. It's a secure, slightly more moist environment for their offspring. It has been determined, there was an article published on the success of the Cincinnati Zoo in reproducing the blue death feigning beetles. And I know that Russ over at the Aquarimax Pets channel here on YouTube is trying to duplicate their results, and I do recommend you guys check out his videos over there for the latest and greatest updates as he works to reproduce them. I don't usually set a tank up like this. I'm merely doing this for display purposes. I don't personally make any efforts to reproduce the beetles because I generally have good access to them. There are parts of the Southwest, like the Mojave Desert, for example, where the biomass of blue death feigning beetles, for example, exceeds that of all other living things in the desert. They are quite common if you know how to find them, where to find them, when to find them, and things like that. The next thing we're going to do here is put a layer of sand down on top. Let's talk about sand for a moment. I prefer the cheapest possible sand that you can find. And there are quite a few different kinds. You see that I'm creating a little bit of a cloud here as I'm doing this. And so I like to pour it kind of slow and low so that it doesn't generate that big cloud. It's probably any kind of particulate matter that gets into your lungs. If it's fine like that in the air, it doesn't matter what it is. Assume it's not good for you. In the case of sand, it's definitely probably not good for you. Doesn't matter if you use play sand or anything else. Got a couple other kinds of sand right here. I've got some pink sand, and then I've got this glow-in-the-dark sand, which is actually really cool. I prefer this grayer sand here personally because it's both cheaper and it absorbs water. This kind of sand over here, very fine, it tends to repel water. It's hydrophobic. And so if I put a droplet of water on it, and you guys can test this if you happen to get some kind of sand and you're not sure whether it's hydrophobic or not, just put a water droplet on top of it. And if that water droplet is not absorbed, that means that that water is just going to sit up there and probably adhere to a beetle when it comes by. Another problem with some sands for desert beetles is that they are too fine. They are more like silt or even kind of chalky sometimes. And though I've not proven it personally because I don't ever really use this kind of sand, I suspect that it's possible that the fine powdery sands could clog up the spiracles or breathing holes which line the abdomen of our desert beetles, and that could contribute to respiratory or other health problems, and so I avoid those. A lot of people also ask me about finely ground walnut shells, and I've heard some people say they had problems with that. Again, it's very much like a powdery consistency or texture, like fine sand. Probably best to avoid that. And then walnut shells are probably okay. Actually, in nature, these beetles, when I've encountered them, the blue death feigning beetles, for example, and most of the other desert beetles, they tend to be in dry but fairly rockier habitats, not so much sand. There are some that are found in sand, like the smooth death feigning beetles, Asbolus, laevis, and you'll find that they have little setae or bristles on their legs that help them to, if they fall on their back in sand, they can right themselves back over by using the bristles on their legs to sort of gain traction and flip themselves over. So back to putting sand in our tank here. I'm going to put the sand in here so that it's even across the length of this tank. And like, no joke, wear a mask. I'm in the recent world especially concerned about taking care of the health of my lungs. You don't want to make yourself more susceptible to any of the germs that are out there in the world right now. And so I will often do one of these. It's a great look for YouTube, but if it ends up saving your life, it's completely worth it, in my opinion. You guys can see that there is a gradient. On one side, the sand is deeper, and on the other side, the compost is deeper. And that'll be good for the larvae and the adults, some species. Now, it's more than likely that with the movements of the larvae and the adults, this nice line that you see between the sand and the compost below it, that's probably going to get mixed up a little bit. You'll start to see some of the compost come to the surface over time as they work their way through it. And we can still see a little bit of our log poking out here. The beetles will find that. And I could keep pouring sand in here until I have that line looking exactly how I want it to be, maybe a little deeper than this, because they will sort of over time track this up and it won't be as pretty looking. Some people may want to use a beige or colored sand up on top. That's pretty common. I stick with the gray. Like I said, in rocky areas where they occur, the habitat actually tends to be sort of a cross between beige and this gray color anyway, so I don't picture these death feigning beetles as living on beaches necessarily, which is what most people think of when they think of sand, or they think of like the Sahara Desert in Africa or something. No, that's not what the habitats look like often where I find them. Now we have this all down, it's time to decorate, and there's my box of decorations. So you can really put pretty much anything you want to in the tank. A couple common things to see in there are these bits of cholla. Cholla is an evil plant that lives in the deserts, and I've had it on my leg, stuck to my leg before. It's called jumping cholla. And it may be sitting out there, a piece of it breaks off this large cactusy looking plant, and it's laying there in the desert, just completely unsuspiciously, and you're walking past it, and then all of a sudden, you don't even know how, but it's up there on your leg, and it's stuck to your leg with like 30 spines with little microscopic fish hooks in the end stuck to your leg, and the more you try to take it off you on one end, the more it digs in on the other end. And so one of the great plants right here, this is actually sort of the skeleton of the plant. This is what's left after all of the living material has died. Another popular hide for the tank, that's HIDE. is cork bark. It tends to be flat or sometimes a little bit rounded, and the beetles can crawl under it. And like I said earlier, during the heat of day, they like to hide under rocks or plants, or more often than not, they'll use rodent burrows and even scorpion burrows, which we will take a look at a little bit later because it's very popular for people to keep communal tanks of desert hairy scorpions and blue death feigning beetles. So, piece of cork bark is a good option. There's this other kind of wood here called mapani wood. Some people just like the way it looks. It doesn't really matter what you put in the tank in terms of decorations. Every time I go on a trip somewhere, I bring a rock back, and I'll often drop them in my tanks. Here's a piece of obsidian I found. So I've got a few different rocks in here. Another very common thing that people will put in these tanks with their desert beetles are fake plants. And fake plants, along with real plants, look really nice. But let me grab a real plant here just for demonstration purposes. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the concerns that I have. Hey, if you like me, give me one of those thumbs up. And please subscribe and hit the little bell so you know when I post next. Please share me with your friends on social media. Thank you for watching.